One of the big reasons that a lot of veterans struggle when they transition back into the civilian world is that we come from a very structured community in the military. It's very structured. There's a strong unit that you live with and you work with, and you're there with them every day. You have strong support. And when you get out of the military, that just sort of all goes away. You know, from day one in basic training, wherever you went, you were taught one of the biggest principles you ever learned in the military was that you don't go anywhere alone. But as veterans get out of the military and they transition out of it, they end up going back to their hometown or somewhere else, and they're completely alone. They're no longer with their unit. They're no longer with the people they've gotten to know over the past several years or even served with in combat. And that's one of the most dangerous places a person can be on a battlefield, is alone. And they transition onto a new battlefield. It's the battlefield of civilian life. See, being in the military, there are a lot of things we didn't have to worry about because they were taken care of because we were in the military. It's almost like you get institutionalized for 4 or 6 years or however long you've served, but then you have to get out. And the thing about it is this: in the military, they train us how to lead and survive and to win in combat, how to adapt to the battles that we face, how to adapt to ambushes that we face. But one thing nobody teaches us is how to use those same principles and skill sets that we have and apply them to the battles we face as we transition out and we get into civilian life. And that's one really unfortunate thing I've always sort of looked at, and I've always wondered why nothing's ever been done about that. Because when you see your life, when you view your life within the context of war, you get to enjoy more control of your life. And the reason for that is because you can foresee attacks before they come if you know what to look for. You can gather allies for a coming storm or a coming battle if you see it coming. Or you can see opportunities that present themselves. But if you're just sort of wandering through life and you don't have a battle mindset, you overlook a lot of things that can completely blindside you and destroy you. And I know some of you are facing a battle. Pretty much everybody in here is facing a battle of some sort because, you know, it's 2020. I mean, it's 2020, so it's, you know, it's a great year. You know, with a lot of problems come also a lot of opportunities, though. And so I want to present you with this question. I want you to think about this. What battle are you facing in your life right now that you need to win? I want you to think on that, because as veterans, the government, they ask us to go to war. They ask us to give our lives in service to our country, and we do it voluntarily. What they don't teach us how to do, however, is how to transition back into civilian life so we can lead normal lives again and enjoy the freedoms that we defended. And to me, that's just insane. It's pretty crazy. I always figured, you know, this country is over 200 years old. We don't have any sort of solid system for helping over 200,000 people a year get out of the military and go back into the civilian world. With as many people as coming out every single year, we don't actually have a set system or some sort of pathway that we can generally follow. It's a very broken and fractured system that you just have to sort of figure out. I've heard some veterans say that getting out of the military is like stepping off a cliff. But instead of hitting the ground, you go through a wood chipper first. And then you hit the ground, and you're scraped up, you're scarred up, but you're there, and you just sort of try to figure it out. We have men and women who are, you know, they serve for 4, 5, 10 years or more, and they're just stellar in combat, they're stellar at their jobs, they're the best of the best, and they get out, and things just go completely sideways. It's because we've been tossed onto a battlefield, and nobody trained us to identify the enemies that we're going to face. And so ambush after ambush after ambush, we have to react during the ambush to try to get out of it, whereas we could have foreseen the ambush. If we could have, it would have been a lot better. We see problems like veteran homelessness. Now, there are a lot of figures, a lot of factors and variables that contribute to a lot of these issues, but a rough transition out of the military is one of them. There's not just homelessness, but there's also veteran suicide. We all hear about the 22 veterans a day who commit suicide. I don't know what it's up to now. Somebody the other day told me it's 26 since COVID. I don't have a source on that, so I can't say that's true or not. Unfortunately, what I can say is I don't find it difficult to believe. So that's an issue. We have military families, veteran families falling apart at the seams from a lot of these issues that veterans are facing, and their families, by the way, because they fight a war themselves. They have their own battles for being married to people like me. All right, some of you spouses know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, you can take Camp Pendleton out in California, one military base, 85% divorce rate. 8.5 out of 10 marriages at one military base, Camp Pendleton, they're divorcing. That's their first time enlisted. And some people wonder, Brian, where'd you get that number? I got that number right off of Camp Pendleton's official military website. And you look at issues like that, and then they come out, then their family falls apart, and then mental health issues, PTSD, things they don't know how to handle, trying to deal with traumatic brain injuries and memory issues and nightmares, and I've dealt with a lot of that myself. I have a traumatic brain injury. I have short-term memory issues, by the way. There's no reason I should be standing up here. I can't remember anything. I don't even know what I had for breakfast. I don't even know if I had breakfast this morning. But all that looks really good, by the way. But there's all these issues that they deal with. And it's a bigger foundational issue than most people think, and here's what I mean. More so than most people realize. The problem is, we have young people in America watching this. And here's what I mean. If we don't help our veterans transition productively back into civilian life, and they keep hitting roadblocks and falling off of cliffs, so to speak, nobody in the future is going to want to defend this country and fight for it and serve in the military. I don't know one 15 or 16 or 18-year-old that says, yeah, I want to have a bunch of mental health problems. I want to be that 22-year-old guy who just got back. He's 4 years ahead of me, and he's on 30 different pills, and he's been married 3 times, and his kids resent him, and his wife hates him. That's the story for a lot of veterans. Not all of us, but this is a very real thing. These are a lot of very real battles that we fight. But if we can get this right, if we can help veterans transition out of the military productively, and our young people can look at our community and say, hey, that guy or that lady went through all that, and after they got out, they kept going up. They kept fighting. They kept going up in life. And they inspired me. And you know what? They started off in the military. I want to start off in the military because it obviously had something to do with it. Nobody has an aspiration to be 23 or 25 years old and completely done with their life and shut down with a terrible home life. Nobody wants that. What they want is to be inspired. They want to see people who have gone through rough things and made it. And so many of you veterans in here, the reason you're here is because we're some of the ones who have made it. But not everybody does. That's what's at stake. The future of our country, the protection of our country against our enemies, who, by the way, are very real. If you're not a veteran, you've probably never had to look a terrorist in the eye who tried to kill you after you survived the attack. Well, I have, and many of you veterans have also had that experience. There are very real people in this world who, if they get the chance, they will harm your family and mine. Our little kids, they will go after them if they get the chance. And our young people today, our teenagers will be going into the military pretty soon. It'll be that time. And we want them to continue to defend this country and to serve and to protect for further generations so we can continue to enjoy these freedoms of sitting here and being here today. In Afghanistan, there were meetings just like this one that took place that would get rocketed while people were in here. That's what much of the rest of the world is like, but not here in America. We get to sit here today because we're in a safe place, because people serve and people protect our right to do that. Now, I served with the Army's 10th Mountain Division while fighting the ground war in Afghanistan. I was a team leader. It was I deployed back in 2006, and it was quite an interesting year. And while I was there, the first month, about a month after we arrived, my vehicle ran over what's called an IED. If you don't know what that is, it's a fancy military term for a roadside bomb. You run it over, it blows up your vehicle. It was a double stack of anti-tank mines that were buried in the road. And fortunately, nobody died in that explosion, but we had 2 guys who were injured. I had to drag one of the guys out because he was partially conscious, but we got him out, and they both returned to duty a month later. But this is a picture right here of that first vehicle. That was in the Arghandab province of Afghanistan, about just north of Kandahar, and it was an interesting day. You know what was more interesting, though, is when I arrived back at the base about 3 days after that. It took us that long to get back because we were a vehicle short, we were a 17-man platoon, and we had no reinforcements. And so we got back, and I can't explain everything in life, but I think during extreme times, extreme things happen that we can't explain. But I got back to the base about 3 days after this, and my mother had written me an email, and she said, you know, Brian, a couple days ago, I had a very strange, intense feeling to pray for your protection as I was driving down the street. She lived in Rochester, New York at the time, and I hadn't spoken to her in at least a week at that point. Well, we worked out the time difference. It happened to be within just a couple hours of this explosion that she had this crazy feeling to just pull her car to the side of the road and start praying for me and my platoon. And I don't know if you're a person of faith or not. Doesn't matter. That's how it happened. And so we can't explain everything. I just know God tells women everything, and I'm okay with that. You know, Brad, you know how it is. And it's a crazy happening. So we survived that. Here's another picture of the same vehicle. That's where I was sitting right there in the back seat, completely blown up, totally destroyed. But, you know, the bombs weren't done yet, because just a couple months later, I decided that I wanted to reclass my job from infantry to what's called EOD. How many of you know what EOD stands for? Explosive Ordnance Disposal. They're basically the bomb squad. So if you see that guy or that lady running, you better be in front of them. And yeah, it's that kind of thing. And for some crazy reason, even after the first explosion, I wanted to reclass my job. Well, I got in the vehicle. I was a lead truck commander of about a 15-vehicle convoy going through Kandahar, 2 miles away from Kandahar airfield, where I had to get reevaluated by the doctor to get cleared to go to EOD. And a white minivan pulled up in front of my vehicle. And he was going very, very slow. So my driver passed him on the left. I was in the front passenger seat. And as we got right up next to him, passing him on the left, just like you would out here on the tollway, as we got right up next to him, he hit the clicker, he completely exploded. The entire minivan next to us exploded from about me to this American flag. And it was a vehicle being driven by a suicide bomber. And we were told later he was heading for the main gate to Kandahar, and he ran into us on the way. And he blew himself and his van into about 10,000 pieces that day in the middle of the street. And I'm happy to report he was the only person who died that day. So more power to him. He accomplished his mission, sort of. I mean, if you're a suicide bomber, you got one mission, right? I mean, see ya, you know. Well, he did accomplish it. He just didn't take us with him. And so I'm grateful for that. None of us died. Me and another guy were injured. And here's a picture of that vehicle. That's my door right there, all blown up, blasted. I woke up in a ditch laying right outside that vehicle. Had no idea what happened. My first thought was, why would I go to sleep here? Because I didn't remember laying down there. But I was there. My helmet was off my head. I had a fountain of blood pouring out of my face. I did sort of a push-up, and I got to my feet. Luckily, there was no follow-on ambush, but I had a full face and neck second-degree burn, which is now healed, thankfully, and full thickness third-degree on both my hands, which have now healed as well, and very grateful I can use my hands again. The nurse told me I'll never be a hand model, but I wasn't too broken up over that. And this is what's left of the minivan. So he was carrying some pretty powerful stuff. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, so I like to think that thing wasn't made up in Detroit. But not that it would have mattered with what he was packing. He was finished. So I'm not going to tell you what I think the last thing that went through his head was, but I'll let your imagination wander. Two of you got that. That was me right after it happened. It's a pretty nasty picture. I hope you're not eating pasta. If you're probably not hungry anymore. That was taken right after they scraped me off the side of the road, got me into Kandahar. Some guy walks up and he says, I thought he was going to give me medicine, and he says, hey, can I take your picture? He's like happy. He's like having a good day. I'm like, yeah, wow, thanks. How about some medicine, man? I'm hurting. And he said, oh yeah, I'll get you that medicine. He took my picture. I never saw the guy again. So maybe he was a photographer, I don't know, but wasn't a medic. But he put that on a disc and he sent it home with me in a box full of my stuff, and that's my Afghanistan souvenir. Of course, I have this picture from about a day later in Germany. I'm in Germany, medevacing me home, and another person comes up and says, hey, I need to take your picture. And I thought, what's with you people and your pictures of me? She said, well, you don't have a military ID card. She said, you can't go back to America without a military ID. I said, okay. She said, I need to take your picture. So this picture was on my military ID card for the next 14 months and my last 14 months in the military. And you see, my face obviously healed. So every time I go through Brooke Army Medical Center's gates, you got to check the ID card, right? And they would just look at it, they look at me, and they do a double take, and they go, man, dear God, what happened to you? And I just tell them stuff like, eventually it got annoying. And so I started telling them, like, I'm allergic to suicide bombers and things like that, just to mess with them, just to have fun. And even though all this was bad, you know, I survived. If you go through something bad in life, if you're still here, you'll figure it out. Time always continues to go on. And that was my left hand. I'm not sure how good you can see it out there, but they, when they got me into Brooke Army Medical Center, the first thing they did is they put me on a table and they rolled me into a shower room. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but the guy, one of the nurses said, hey, we're going to do this as quickly as possible so it'll be as painless as possible. And I didn't know what he meant. And him and about 2 other nurses, they all had to pull out razor blades and start shaving the burned and charred skin off my hands, face, and neck. It's called debridement. If you ever know somebody who's been burned severely, they have to do it or you will definitely 100% die of infection. And they have to keep you awake through it because they're afraid that you'll fall into a coma because they usually have to put you out numerous times if they did that. But they also have to do it fast because you can go into shock from the pain. And so they said they'll do it as fast as they could. It took about a half hour, which to me seemed like an eternity. I had about 15% of my body burned. I had friends in the medical center who had up to 97% third-degree burns on their bodies, and I'll tell you right now, I can't imagine what those guys went through because I know what that was like. I can't imagine what they went through, and I just don't even want to, but I'm grateful for them. And a lot of those people are some of my best friends to this day, and they've made it, and they're doing well in life. That's the bottom of that same hand, and that's a picture of my wife. That's my wife, Jamie, who's not able to be here today, but she's from Fort Worth. Now, as a Yankee, when I met Jamie, that's what you all call me down here, or y'all call me, I'm just going to tell you one thing about Texas women. Y'all make them good down here. You do. You do. Because we got married just 3 months before I deployed to the war in Afghanistan. And in 2 weeks, we'll be celebrating 15 years of marriage. She's the one who deserves to be up here, not me. She's put up with a lot, but I got me a good one, and I appreciate that. So, oh, and they just give you a Purple Heart if you get blown up or shot. It's like the award nobody wants. And I call it the enemy marksmanship badge, because he didn't get out of the way. My buddy Jay Redmond, he got shot 8 times. He was a Navy SEAL, and he got ambushed, got shot 8 times. He calls it the Slow Mover Award. I'm like, Jay, we know you're a Navy SEAL, but you're not going to outrun bullets, and obviously you didn't. You know, he's a great guy, but I only show you that to show you the next picture, because I thought, hey, they give you this Purple Heart license plate, right? If you get a Purple Heart, they give you a license plate with a Purple Heart on it. I thought, I should customize it. I should have some fun with this. Well, remember how I said the suicide bomber was the only guy who died? Well, I just thought, what should I say on this thing? And so I just put nice try, and I gave him 2 thumbs up. Yeah. Of course, what I should have done is give him 2 thumbs down, Siskel and Ebert style, but I didn't think of it. But, by the way, this is something I want to give all of you. I wrote a book about a year back. It's called the Resilience Booklet. It's about how extreme survivors overcome massive challenges. And I wasn't able to, we're in a reprint right now, so I wasn't able to have them here. But if you go to freeourbooklet.com, we have the ebook version that all of you can download. And basically where it came from is I was invited to give a talk on post-traumatic stress at a university up in Boston to about 400 doctors and mental health professionals. And I'll be honest, I was the only person there without like 15 extra years of education. And so, but I was the guy who survived something bad, and I think they wanted to kind of figure something out. I don't know what they thought in bringing me in. I had like the least amount of brains in that room, but maybe they needed a laugh or something, I don't know. But I wrote that book, and I made it short intentionally. You can read that book in about 40 minutes. I read it in about 55 minutes, but if you're a normal person, I wrote it because I realized that over the years, there were certain things that I did, and I also realized that there were certain things that other resilient people who overcame extreme circumstances did to move beyond and go beyond and move beyond productively in life and live a better life again after going through something devastating. Whether it was combat wounded veterans or it was Nazi prison camp survivors, I found that there were certain things that extremely resilient people did. And so I put about 20 of those tips into that book right there. And so make sure you go grab it, share that link with anybody. But what I really want to talk to you about today is just how did I get past that? How can veterans win the battles they're facing? Remember I talked about how we know how to fight and plan and win battles, and nobody teaches us that? Well, I have like 7 or 8 points that I teach when I mentor veterans and I help them like put together a battle plan for their life. But there's no time for 7 right here, so I'm going to give you 3. I picked out the 3 most important ones that I think could be most helpful. But one of the first things you have to do is you have to find your next mission. In the military, we always have a mission. There's always something to do. And that's handed down by the commanders. We know our place in the unit. We know our job. We know what we're supposed to do. We know why we're valuable. But again, you get out of the military, all that goes away. And one of the biggest pieces of advice I give when I speak on military bases and for Yellow Ribbon programs is I tell service members, before you get out, find your next mission. You have to find your next mission, or else you just get out and you sort of float around and nothing good really comes from that. And with me, I wanted to speak when I got out and doing what I'm doing now. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I had one opportunity while I was still a patient at the hospital, about 6 months after my injury, to get up on a stage like this for about a minute. And I honestly didn't actually know I was going to be put on stage. A guy named Dave Reaver, who was horribly burned in Vietnam, he came through and he talked at Brooke Army Medical Center to me and about 30 other men and women who were shot up and blown up and injured. And we hit it off, we became friends. He said, hey, I'm speaking at this other thing. I'd love for you to come. And I said, okay. So I showed up. I'm sitting on the front row. Dave is about halfway through his talk. And he looks right down at me and he says, Brian, come on up here. Tell him about yourself. And I was still in burn bandages. My face was still pink. I got up. What I didn't realize is that the audience behind me had filled in. And when he gave me the mic, I didn't realize until that moment that there were 3,000 people in that room. And I'm like, hey, I got blown up. I guess I'm still here for a reason. Go for it. You know, you got to be motivational, right? It was like the worst motivational speech. It was probably pitiful. But here's what happened. There was a 1-degree shift that took place, and it wasn't on stage. It was after I got off stage, and here's what it was. This changed the direction of my life. I got off stage, and a young lady who was probably 23 at the time, 23, 24, about the same age I was, she walked up to me. She didn't even tell me her name, and she said, you know, Brian, she said, I was abused in several ways, and I'll leave that to your imagination. She said, I was abused in all these different ways growing up. She said, through my teenage years it continued. She said, my boyfriend was abusive to me, and he just broke up with me recently, and I tried to kill myself 2 weeks ago, but I failed. And she said, you know, but here's what happened. She tagged this on me, and she said, you know, but if you can survive all that, she said, I think maybe I can get through this. And something happened in me that a lot of people know what they want to do with their lives. Something came out of me that I didn't actually know was in there. And I told Dave that night, I said, I don't know what happened tonight, but I have to do this. Like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, or I'm going to die trying. Other than in a gunfight, I've never been so certain of my life. It was, this is what I'm going to do, and it's worth any price I'm going to pay. I liked how it helped her, but the thing about it was this, I didn't realize it, but it helped me. And what it actually did is it gave meaning to my suffering. Whenever we suffer, it helps a lot if you know that it's for a reason or for a cause that matters, or that it's leading somewhere worth going. A guy named Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi prison camps, and he said when it came to suffering, he said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. It becomes something else. Your suffering becomes something else when it finds a meaning. He also said, you know, when it comes to despair, despair is basically the complete loss of hope. And there are a lot of people in the world like that. And you might be sitting next to one and you don't even know it. Because as people, we're good at hiding things. Especially if you're in the military. You were trained to hide it. Now they say, hey, hey, go ask for help. It's like, oh yeah, you trained me not to do that. And you wonder why we don't. But when it came to despair, he had his own definition of the word despair. He said despair is suffering without meaning. And if you ever find your place, or you find yourself or somebody you know in a place where they're suffering without meaning, that's probably the most dangerous place a person can be mentally. Because there's no foreseeable way out of what they're going through. And you know what's interesting, though, about Viktor Frankl, because he said after he got out, or while he was in the prison camps, he actually had a vision for what he wanted to do with his life when he got out. Now, I don't know if you know anything about Auschwitz, but most people never got out alive. He had a 1 in 28 chance of surviving Auschwitz, which are terrible odds. But even when he was in the worst of it, in the Nazi prison camp, he had a vision for what he wanted to do with his life after he got out, if he survived. And that vision sort of pulled him forward. A lot of people in there, they wanted to see their family again if they were still there. They looked forward to that. Viktor Frankl, he wanted to go and speak in universities because he was a PhD, he was a psychiatrist. He wanted to go around the world and speak in universities about the psychology of concentration camps. That was his next vision for his life while he was in the fire, in the worst place, humanly almost unimaginable. But it was even in that he had a vision for what he was going to do if he made it out. That was sort of what I experienced when I met that young lady. I was still struggling. I still dealt with a lot of post-traumatic stress. I still had the head injuries, the memory issues, and everything else that comes with it, the headaches twice a day, 3 times a day that just don't go away. All these issues, but I still had a vision for what I wanted to do with my life. And something else Victor said about our circumstances, he said, you know, when we cannot change our circumstances, we're forced to change ourselves. And Marcus Aurelius put it very well when he said, the great Roman emperor, he said, when you are distressed by an external thing, it's not the thing itself that troubles you, but only your judgment of the thing. Basically, your perception of the thing is what's bothering you. He said, and you can wipe that away in a moment's notice. We can change our perception of whatever it is by our own will and choice, based on whatever's happening in front of us, whatever circumstance is bad in front of you. You judge it one way as bad, but you can see it more than one way. And when you realize that every problem in the world pretty much presents one or more opportunities, it's a little bit easier to do that in your personal life. So we can't control the external circumstances in our lives, but we can control how we respond to those things. And that's what's going to make the difference in a person's life. It's how we choose to respond to those things. Not the things we can't control, but how we respond, that's what we actually can control. The second thing you have to do is you have to identify your real enemies. We have some very real enemies in this world. And a lot of times, when you're fighting a battle in your life, you're actually fighting the symptom of an enemy, not the actual enemy itself. And if you fight the symptom of an enemy, the enemy's never going to go away. That roadside bomb we hit, that wasn't the enemy. That was proof of the enemy's presence. It was an instrument of the enemy. But until we went out and got the guys and took them down who were planting those bombs on the road, there would continue to be those bombs exploding in the road. And when you look at that, it's like you can't, let's say you're having an argument about money with your spouse. Your spouse probably isn't the enemy. You know what the real enemy probably is? In some case, if it comes to money, it usually comes down to fear. Someone has a fear that it's going to run out and you're going to be destitute and broke and lose everything. That's usually the real enemy. It's somebody's fear. I don't know what your marriage is like, but mine, there's a free spirit and there's a highly conservative person. And when it comes to how you manage money, that's not always the best thing. And so you're not actually fighting each other. Now, I always say, and in about 1% of marriages, your spouse is the enemy, because I know 1% of people are probably complete psychopaths. That's just my life experience. But it's probably not the case in your case, and it's definitely not in mine. Yeah, some of you are laughing because you're like, I think I know that person. Yeah, oh, I know, me too. Just not mine. But, so, where am I at? Boy. Yeah, identify your real enemies. Whenever you're facing something, just remember, the real enemy usually lies just beneath the surface of the obvious problem you're dealing with. whether it's a transitioning out of the military, or it's a marriage issue, or a financial issue, or a career issue. The real enemies they'd like to hide. And so the third thing you need to remember is to identify your allies. You have to identify allies. This, again, we talked about in the military, you always need to have somebody who is going to be with you to help you win. We say in the Army that a lone ranger is a dead ranger. And it's right. There are no Rambos in this world. With as much as I love those movies, he's just not real. And you can't win a battle, you can't win a war all by yourself. The person who is alone in a war zone is almost always the first person to get captured or killed. And if they get hurt, they have nobody to help them. You don't want to be that person. And I'm going to give an example here that I think a lot of you can relate to, because especially as military veterans, people, they say, hey, if you're struggling, go ask for help, go get help. But what happens? What's the response to that? I'm good. I don't need help. I'm good. Nobody wants to go get help, right? Because they think it's weakness. I used to be that way. But let me ask you this. Let me give you a military example, a real one. I was in a 17-man platoon in Afghanistan. We lived in the mountains. There were several missions where we had what's called close air support flying overhead of us. Apache gunships, A-10 Warthogs, B-52 bombers, warplanes that would bomb our enemies if we would call them. Now, when you're 17 people, each of you carries about 300 rounds of ammo on your chest because you don't want to run out. And if there's a superior enemy force that is attacking you and you have close air support on hand, can you imagine somebody looking at the leader and says, hey, platoon leader, hey, LT, call in air support. There's 100 of them, and they're coming this way. Can you imagine if your leader said, we're not calling in air support. We don't want command to think we can't handle ourselves in battle. That's called stupid. That's not called strong. That's called stupid. And the thing is, everybody watching the battle, they know you're in a bad spot. We think we're hiding things. You're not hiding anything. We all know. Trust me. Now, I've been the guy. I've been on both sides of that. That's why I can say that. But no competent leader would ever not call in air support when they need it. Yet so many times in our personal lives, we know we're dealing with something, but it's usually our ego keeping us from stopping and stopping us from getting the help we need. But the thing is, if that leader didn't call in air support, he or she might die, or a bunch of his or her people who follow them will be the collateral damage, and they'll get hurt or they'll die. And when you think about that in the context of your life, you might say, well, I'm not in a war zone. I don't have people under me. Oh, yeah, you do. You have people you work with. You have kids. You have a family. You have family members. And sometimes they will be the collateral damage of our bad choices if we don't call in the air support and the allies who can help us. Because here's the important thing about an ally, about air support. When you're flying, if I'm on the ground, I can see horizontally, just like this. But if you're in an airplane or a helicopter looking down on Embassy Suites, Frisco, you have a completely different vantage point and perception and view of my battlefield. You can see things on that battlefield that I can't see. And I might step into a hornet's nest of a bunch of bad things or more enemy fighters because I didn't know they were on the other side of that door. But you could have told me ahead of time. But if I wasn't willing to listen, it would have cost me and it would have cost the people with me. So I want to encourage you in your marriages and in your life, your career, whatever key area of your life that you're dealing with things. If you have a battle, I know you do. Everybody has a battle and they keep coming and going. That's life. It's a constant. You're going to fight a battle. You're going to get past it. You're going to adapt, and then something else is going to happen. When it rains, it pours. It does. So what is that in your life? Smart leaders reach out and have allies. They create a personal chain of command for people who can help them win because it matters. So, again, I just want to remind you, go get the free Resilience Booklet, the ebook copy. Send that link to anybody you know who might be going through a hard time. It's not motivational fluff. It's a really hard life experience based on a lot of the stuff I've talked about today and even more. And I just want to remind you that next time the enemy starts blowing things up in your life, regardless of what area of your life it is, If you use a little bit of what I talked about today, maybe just pick one or two things or something out of this book, you will be able to confidently move forward from a position of strength. And you're not just going to have to take the hits. It'll allow you to stop playing defense all the time. And you can actually get out on the offense and destroy the enemies in your life that are trying to destroy you and your family, whatever it is in your life that's under attack. And so, I just want to end with this. There are rules to warfare. It sounds weird if you don't know. There are rules to warfare. And if you obey them, you can win. If you ignore them, you will lose. So don't do that. Don't do that. These things have worked for me. They've worked for thousands of people I've spoken to over the past 14 years, and they can work for you and your loved ones as well. Thank you. Come on. Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
Sure. Sure. There you go.
Yes. Is that on?
Thank you, Ryan. That was wonderful. Wonderful wisdom that we all use. I'm going to open this up for a couple of Q&As. Does anyone have any questions you'd like to ask Ryan? We're good there? Ryan, do you mind sharing what you and your wife have recently launched?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, here we go.
I'll take two microphones. Oh, hello. There we go. Yeah, real quick. I talked about the battles we face and how there are certain battle strategies that work. Well, my wife and I, we recently launched a program called Marriage Battle Plan at marriagebattleplan.com, and we use proven military battle planning strategies. Basically, how we plan missions in the military and carry them out in combat. We adapted those same principles. If you know what an operations order is, it's based on that, but it's not nearly as painful if you've done one. But we use those principles to identify the real enemies in your life. So instead of fighting each other, you can start fighting the real enemies in your marriage, and so you can prosper in your marriage and do better together. So if you want more information on that, it's proven, it's helped a lot of people, and it's based on over 200 years of proven military battle strategies that work. So it's marriagebattleplan.com, and it's an awesome program, and because my wife is a part of it.